now we will begin. I want to welcome everybody at our Gita Talks class. Today we will continue to listen to Mahayogi Prabhu. He will be telling us about the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Mahayogi Prabhu is a truth seeker with a long history. He is on this way he has been on this way for more than 45 years, and now he's living in Mexico, and he is a teacher in the university, and he is also one of the authors, one of the compilers of great 5 books, books by Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and now he is also continuing to edit and to publish spiritual books. And now he is with us. He is our speaker on Gita Talks. And so, Dandavats.
Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Manchakalpaturviyasya Kripasindhubhyevacha Patitanam Bhavanabhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So we were talking about, mostly in the 3rd chapter, Krishna's talking about karma, karmic reaction, work, and he touches on the idea of sacrifice. And here in the 4th chapter, he takes up the theme of sacrifice and continues a little bit. So I think we left off around the 24th verse, so I'll just read that. Brahmarpanam brahmahavir brahmagno brahmanahutam brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahmakarmas samharina. So this is, I'm reading from the Bhagavad Gita as it is by Bhaktivedanta Swami, and he says, the person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute, and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. Now, there might be some controversy regarding that translation, because in the Sanskrit, it doesn't say Krishna consciousness. It says Brahma, and the word Brahma is repeated again and again. Brahmarpanam brahmachavir. He says, Brahma, sometimes it's translated like this. Brahma is the ladle by which the ghee is poured, and Brahma is the ghee, and Brahma is the fire. And when spiritual sacrifice is offered into the spiritual fire, everything is spiritual. Brahma karma samadhina, all the karma is absorbed by Brahma. And so that word Brahma, it means what is spiritual. And for the devotees of Krishna, of course, what is spiritual means Krishna consciousness. But it's translated differently by different people. Prabhupada comments, the word Brahma means spiritual. The Lord is spiritual, and the rays of his transcendental body are called Brahmajyoti, his spiritual effulgence. Everything that exists is situated in that Brahmajyoti. That's kind of an interesting thing to say. Sridhar Maharaj used to say that the material world floats in consciousness, just as an iceberg floats in the ocean. So the whole idea of the material world is something that's floating in the Brahmajyoti, or in spiritual consciousness. The idea here is that, properly speaking, a person who's absorbed in spiritual life generates no karma. But that can also be a little bit external to the idea of pure Krishna consciousness, as we'll see as the Bhagavad Gita unfolds. So Krishna elaborates. He says, Daivameva pare jagyam jogina paribhasate brahmagnava pare jagyam jagyenaiv pajuvati. So he's talking about jagya, which means sacrifice. And we'll come to a conclusion, or we'll talk about sacrifice in more detail. But let's just hear what Krishna says. He says, some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them. And some of them offer sacrifice in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. And then he says, Shotadindriyanye samyamya nishu juvati shabdadin vishayan anya indriyagnishu juvati. And some sacrifice the hearing process and the senses and the fire of mental control. And others sacrifice the objects of the senses and the fire of the senses. Others who are interested in achieving self-realization through control of the mind and senses offer the functions of all the senses and the life breath as oblations into the fire of the controlled mind. Well, this is a very esoteric literature, the Bhagavad Gita, and it's difficult to understand exactly how sacrifice was performed thousands of years ago. But Krishna is giving us a bit of insight into that. I'm looking at the commentary of Srila Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha, and I'll read you a little bit of his commentary. Hang on. There we go. He comments like, he translates that like this. He says, offering sacrificial ghee, sacrificial rites performed by the priest in fire are all spiritual. Spirit is obtainable by him who is deeply absorbed in meditation, seeking revelation of spirit in his karma. And I'm translating the word Brahman as spirit. So there's a class of philosophers called the karma mimamsas. And they have this idea that through sacrifice, you develop a quality that's called apurva. And that's helpful for you in your next life to attain a higher spiritual level. But those who follow nishkama karma yoga, or karma yoga without any desire, we don't hold to that. And that's one of the few comments that Sridhar Maharaj makes in his Bhagavad Gita. He says, the actions of one practicing the yoga of selfless action do not lead to apurva, as considered by the philosophers known as karma mimamsaka. According to their ethical yet atheistic ideology, the mundane rationalists, or karma mimamsas, they claim that pious actions produce an unseen subtle potency known as apurva, which must fructify at the appropriate time after death. Their conception that this fruit can later be shared by others is meant to show the eternality of karma or action, but it ignores the presence of the supreme autocrat. The idea being that some people believe that God puts out the law, like a clockmaker who sets the clock in motion. And after the clock is set in motion, the clockmaker has nothing to do with the clock. So in a similar way, God makes the laws of physics that govern physical activity. the laws of karma that govern karmic activity. And after that, it's up to you to follow the law. And if you follow the law, then you will be rewarded because that's the law. And God is not part of that. So this is really an atheistic philosophy. God is in the background, and he makes the law and sets things in motion, but he's also really bound by the law. But this is not really a theistic conception, since if God exists, he can't be bound by any law, or as Hegel put it, he is by himself and for himself. So the idea of the karma mimamsas is rejected. And then Krishna is explaining here that karma sacrifice can be performed to the devas, or the minor gods, but the more advanced yogis have a more spiritual process. He says, a yogi is an avowed performer of brahmajagya. So sacrificing yourself into the fire of spirit. And there's different mentalities among yogis. There's different gradation. But all yogis follow jagya. And jagyas are either karma oriented or jnana oriented. But all of these sacrifices aim at mukti. They're not really aiming at Krishna as the highest of the high, even though Srila Prabhupada is saying here, because he's looking at this from a higher point of view, Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavan iti shabdite. Yes, there is gradation, but the highest spiritual gradation will not be Brahman or Paramatma, but Bhagavan. So he interprets that verse to say that if you're absorbed in Krishna consciousness, you'll achieve the highest spiritual destination. So Krishna goes on describing the different kinds of sacrifice and yogis. He says, having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, others by performing austerities, by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. And the idea of enlightenment here, again, it's kind of talking about Brahman in a more general way, spiritual life. So this chapter is usually characterized as promoting jnana yoga, or the yoga of divine knowledge. Then he talks about pranayama. And he says, the advocates of hatha yoga practice pranayama by stopping the motion of pran, and also by practicing moderation in eating and drinking. And that's their particular form of sacrifice, pranayama. So, for example, when you breathe, you only use one nostril. You can test that by holding a piece of paper up to your nose and seeing which nostril moves. But in pranayama, we close one nostril and breathe in through the right nostril, and then breathe out through the left nostril. And this way we control the life air and the breath. We'll see as Krishna goes on that while he's offering these different ideas of sacrifice, he's considering the idea of transcendental knowledge to be superior to sacrifice. But he's being generous and says, all these performers know the meaning of sacrifice and thus become cleansed of sinful reactions. And having tasted the nectar of the results of sacrifice, they advance towards the supreme eternal atmosphere. O best of the Kuru dynasty, without sacrifice, one can never live happily on this planet or in this life. What then of the next? All these different kinds of sacrifice. Evam bahu vidajagya vitata brahmano mukhe karma jan viditan sarvan evam gatva vimokshate. All these different types of sacrifice are approved by the Vedas and are born of different types of work. Knowing them as such, you will be liberated. So Krishna here has described a lot of different ideas about sacrifice. And if you take a moment, you can think about what is sacrifice? What does that mean? You know, if you look back over history, right, you can think about, because it's difficult to know exactly how Vedic sacrifice was performed, particularly 5,000 years ago. We really don't know. There are many different sort of pancharatric literatures which explain how to do a fire sacrifice, for example. But in the time of Arjuna, we know there was a horse sacrifice. And we don't know exactly what that means. How did they sacrifice a real horse into the fire? We're not so sure. We don't think that Arjuna and the Pandavas and their followers, and Janamejaya, did they eat the meat of the horse? I don't think so. So what exactly does that mean? King Janamejaya offered a snake sacrifice. And because Takshaka had killed his grandfather, Parikshit Maharaj, he was upset and wanted to destroy all the snakes. So he had the Brahmin priests chant mantras and call down all the snakes into the fire until he was stopped by the Brahmana astic. But we don't really know exactly how such sacrifice took place 5,000 years ago. It's a very long time. And we have very little of historic records from that time. But we do know that the Greeks performed sacrifice by killing animals and burning them and offering the flesh to the gods, and then holding a big festival where they would eat the flesh. So there's different kinds of sacrifice. Not all sacrifice is in the mode of goodness. There's sacrifice in the mode of ignorance, tamagun, the mode of passion, rajagun, and the mode of goodness, sattvagun. We know that the ancient Aztecs would practice human sacrifice by offering the person to be sacrificed a delicious mixture of psychedelic drugs and mushrooms and things to calm someone's nerves, and then promising the person to be sacrificed that they would soon go to see the gods. And then they would lay him down in front of the Chakmul stone idol, and using an obsidian knife made of black volcanic glass, they would open his rib cage and pull out his smoking heart and offer that to the sun god. Well, that's sacrifice, but that's not the kind of sacrifice that we're being asked to perform in the age of Kali. We're told that the proper sacrifice for this age was advanced by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the form of Sankirtan, or congregational chanting of the holy name, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And that this is the proper way to perform sacrifice and to become enlightened and to develop divine love or bhakti. So here Krishna is talking about sacrifice in a very general kind of way, saying, well, there's sacrifice to the gods, There's the yogic kinds of sacrifice. There's all different types of sacrifice that are approved by the Vedas according to one's station in life. Not everybody can do the same sort of work. So according to your qualification, you may have a different kind of sacrifice to offer, or a different sort of religion to follow, if you like. But since we're talking about gradation, and we're moving from a very general idea about karma yoga to a very general idea about sacrifice and giving something to God, giving of yourself. Now we want to move a little bit higher and talk about divine knowledge, because it's through divine knowledge that you begin to become closer to God. Of course, knowledge is limited. For example, in the Divine Comedy of Dante, he shows how Dante himself is led or guided through hell by the poet Virgil, who represents reason. And later, Virgil also guides him through purgatory, which is a place of suffering, preliminary to the Christian idea of liberation or heaven. But when he stands before the gates of heaven, Virgil tells Dante, I can no longer guide you because faith is the only guide here. And in that book, Beatrice represents faith and leads Dante into the higher domain, heaven as it's conceived of by the Catholics or by the Aquinian or, Thomasic theology of St. Thomas. I suppose that would be Thomasic.
Wow.
Right? Or Thomasine, right? But at that point, then Beatrice takes over, and she represents the idea of faith. So even the early Catholics in the 1400s or whenever Dante was writing, they conceived that reason has its limits. Reason is useful. Knowledge is useful, but knowledge will have its limits. The idea is that if you couple work and sacrifice in knowledge of the divine, then you develop a form of sukriti that will draw you into the gathering of the saints. It will draw you into the company of sadhus and devotees, and that will spark a little bit of faith within you that will kindle into a bit of a fire. But that's not possible without proper association and guidance. So Krishna says, Shreyan Dravya Maya Jagyaj Jnana Jagya Parantapa Sarvam Karma Kilam Parta Jnane Paris Amapyate. So chastiser of the enemy, Parantapa. Metaphorically, he's telling him, you're capable of conquering the enemy. Why not conquer the mind and senses? The sacrifice performed in knowledge is better than the mere sacrifice of material possession. So here he's coming down to an important point. He's saying there's a gradation here. Better than giving everything up is discovering how to give up the ego through knowledge. That's a higher sacrifice. Giving something up once a year, burning an animal and offering it to the sun god, well, I suppose that's some kind of sacrifice, but a higher sacrifice is giving up the ego, developing divine knowledge. After all, O son of Prita, all sacrifices of work culminate in transcendental knowledge. So again, you can see there's a gradation given in the Bhagavad Gita, where we're moving from the idea of giving in charity to the idea of following dharma and karma and giving in sacrifice to spiritual sacrifice. And finally, why are you doing this? Because you have some knowledge of the nature of the soul, the nature of the Paramatma, and the relationship between them. And then Krishna comes to this verse where he says, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tatvadarshinaha. And he's saying that knowledge, tadvidi, that's available through approaching a genuine spiritual guide, surrendering to him, offering service to him, taking upadesh, taking instruction from him. And in this way, divine knowledge will be achieved by you, jnaninas tatvadarshina, by coming in contact with those self-realized souls who have seen the truth, tatvadarshina, then they will impart truth to you. So it's interesting to me that Krishna says tadvidi. Vidi means knowledge. So he's saying that kind of knowledge by which you can become enlightened, by which you can become spiritually aware, by which you can ascend to the higher domain. That knowledge, that's what we're interested in. So the other day we were talking about epistemology and how do you know what you know? And someone asked me, well, so what is knowledge? What's the difference between knowledge and information? So there are many things that you might know, but we don't classify that as knowledge. If you look in the dictionary, knowledge will be what you can acquire through the mind and the senses, but that's empiric knowledge. If you study the philosophers, you'll see they have different opinions on what constitutes real knowledge. And the word knowledge comes from gnosis, which is Greek. Like in Spanish, we have conocer, gnosis, to know. What is not knowledge is igno. See, the word know, igno, means I don't know. Ignorance. So ignorance would be the opposite of kenosis, which was Greek, or knowledge. But there's kind of a fight over that. If you believe in God, then you're gnostic, and if you don't, you're agnostic. But agnostic doesn't mean that you're ignorant. It just means that you're inconclusive as to what is knowledge. But what is knowledge? Today, knowledge is information. For example, well, the Nazis, for example, they developed a recipe for turning the best poets, the best artists, the best composers of Europe into soap, into bars of soap. So they had a recipe. Here's a composer, and what we need from the composer, we want to render his fat into a bar of soap. Now, is that knowledge? It's information, it's a recipe, but is that knowledge? What's the best way to butcher a hog? Is that knowledge? Well, it's knowledge in the mode of ignorance, isn't it? So then you can classify knowledge as being in the mode of ignorance, the mode of goodness, the mode of passion. Not all knowledge has the same value. And Krishna says this later in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Jnanam karma chakarta cha tridhaiva guna vedata prochyate guna sankhane jatavach trinu tanyapi. According to the three different modes of material nature, there are three kinds of knowledge. Hear about that from me. That knowledge by which one undivided spiritual nature is seen in all living entities, should be understood to be in the mode of goodness. That knowledge by which one sees that in every different body, there's a different type of living entity, is in the mode of passion. So it means if I see, well, I'm a racist, so I don't like yellow people, or I don't like red people, or I don't like black people, because I see the black people are different from the yellow people, who are different from the red people, or, the people of Israel, the people of Russia, the people of Ukraine, the people of Mexico. I see them as different things, different living entities. And I'm perfectly willing to kill the cow and grind the meat and serve that to a dog, because a dog is a higher living entity than a cow. This is all false knowledge. It's not real spiritual knowledge. And so Krishna says, that knowledge by which one sees that in every different body, there's a different type of living entity. Black people have different souls. That's why they have soul music. The white people, we don't have soul music. We have different souls. And then he says, that knowledge by which one is attached to one kind of work as the all in all, without knowledge of the truth, and which is very meager, is said to be in the mode of darkness. So it's interesting, you can think of knowledge in ignorance or knowledge in darkness. So there's this dark knowledge, but that's not what the guru is going to give you. See, tadvidi, that transcendental science by which you can understand the soul in God, that's what the guru is going to impart. You can't go to the guru and ask him, is it going to rain today? He might look at the clouds and say, I don't know, maybe it might rain, it could rain, it's possible. That's not the transcend. It says, Pari Prashna, you're supposed to make relevant inquiry. One time I was at the Mad in Avadvip, and someone kept pestering Srila Sridhar Maharaj about Jesus Christ. Tell me about Jesus. I want to know about Jesus. Take me to Jesus. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj very calmly and, meditatively spoke about the avatar of Christ, or his prophecy, or his position in terms of Vedic knowledge and Krishna consciousness. And then the person again, tell me more about Jesus. Did Jesus really go to India? Did he teach us all about yoga? And finally, Sridhar Maharaj said, you're giving me straw. You're giving me straw. In other words, don't ask the guru how to tie your shoes. Don't ask the guru, what's the best way to go to the bathroom? Oh, Gurudev, I have a problem with my bowels and my intestines, and I'm not really making proper stools. What can I eat? It depends on what day it is. He might favor you and say, well, you should put more yogurt in your diet. But the guru is qualified to speak on transcendental knowledge, and that's what we're interested in. So Krishna explains that to receive divine wisdom, you must be qualified by approaching a bona fide teacher, a guru, who can impart wisdom because he's seen the truth. But this is available to you only through sincere inquiry, service, and surrender. So then the question becomes, well, how do I know? How do I know if he's really a guru? And there's some different tests that we can use. The Vedas say, tad viganartam sagurun eva vigachet samitpani shrotriam brahmanishtam. If you want to know the truth, approach a bona fide spiritual master, and you offer him what's necessary for the sacrifice according to your Gurudev. And such a guru must be fixed in the truth, brahmanishtam. He's heard it in disciplic succession. And you can't know the truth without a teacher. It's a very sort of logical thing. if you want to learn how to shoot a bow and arrow like Arjun, you have to go to a teacher. The teacher will show you, hold the bow like this. No, get your elbow up. All right, extend your arm, focus on the target. You can read a book, and the book will tell you the same things, but the guru can tell you instantly what you're doing wrong. A teacher can tell you instantly, you're doing it wrong. Like I teach English, and here in Mexico, sometimes they'll ask me to work with students out on the ranch, out on the rancho, and I'll say, all right, well, how long have you studied English? 5 years. Okay, good. Say something in English. All right. Mi nama es Jose. Mi nama. Why do they say mi nama? Because that's how you would pronounce that phonetically, right? A ver, dime tu nombre en inglés. Mi nama es Jose. Muy bien. Where are you from? Me from? Where is me? What is me from? Me from es de Guanajuato. Like, okay. And I understand why they're doing that. They're like, my from is, me from es. It makes sense, right? But the teacher can understand. I understand from that you learn from reading a book. That's okay. There's a lot of words I pronounce in English because I saw them in a book, like hegemony. And then I found out one day, it's not hegemony, it's hegemony. Okay. Why? Because, well, I found that word in a book. That's how I pronounce it. But the guru can instantly tell you, hey, you're on the wrong path. Don't do that. Just like a mother or a father can look at a boy who's learning how to walk, and he starts heading for the stairs. And you think, oh, no, if he reaches the stairs, he's just going to tumble down the stairs and break his head. We can't have that. No. And you grab him by the arm and say, don't go that way. You're going to hurt yourself. And the little boys, oh, come on, oh, mommy, I want to do that, or they find some nice white powder in the kitchen, and maybe it's Clorox, or maybe it's, arena, dough, flour. Maybe it's some detergent, or muriatic acid crystals, or Drano, and the boy is like, sugar. Ah, that's sweet. I know about that. Wants to put it in his mouth. So the teacher is there to help you and say, no, don't do that. Do this. You need a teacher. Everything that we know, we learn from teachers. Even though when you go to school, you don't learn much from the teachers in school, but your friends become your teachers. They show you how to play with matches, how to run with a knife, how to ride a bicycle, all the important things in life. Somebody teaches us how to do it. Later on, you say, oh, no, I learned all this by myself. But it's not true. That's a lie. Your first teacher is your mother and your father. And later on in life, your friends and your teachers in school. Everybody teaches us something. But if you're interested in walking on the path of transcendence, then Yasya deve parabhaktir yata deve tataguru tasyaite katita hyarata prakashante mahatmana. Only the Mahatmas who serve Guru and Krishna with faith can understand and reveal the import of the Vedas. That's from the Upanishads. Nayam atma pravachanena labhyo na medaya na bakuna shutena yam ivaisha vrinute tena labhyas. From the Katu Upanishad. The Supreme Self can never be known by any amount of argument, reasoning, intelligence, or hearing, but he can reveal himself, and he can reveal himself through the Guru. Srila Sridhar Maharaj used to say that if the infinite can't reveal himself, then he's not infinite. You could say, well, the finite cannot know the infinite, but if the infinite cannot reveal himself, then he's not infinite. And the infinite does reveal himself through the guru. So how does that work? What is that process? That's the trick. So the guru should be fixed in the absolute truth. The problem with reason, getting back to that point, why can't you know the truth through reason? Is that reason functions through what is called neti, not this, not this, the process of elimination. So I can say, okay, well, knowing the body, I'll classify that as ignorance. Knowing the soul, I'll classify that as knowledge. But how do I know? The nature of the mind is to keep returning to, but why? But why? I had a student in some English class who actually spoke very good English. She just liked to torment me. So whatever I would say, please turn to page 47. She would say, but why, teacher? Why? Well, because we're going to study about the past participle. But why, teacher? Why? Because you need the past participle to understand the present perfect tense of the verb. But why, teacher? Why? Because present perfect tense is very important and talks about global situations in life. But why, teacher? Why? Because we're studying English. But why, teacher? Why? Because it's part of the process that you need in order to graduate from school. But why, teacher? Why? Because if you don't graduate from school, you won't get a good job. But why, teacher? Why? And you know, I learned that that was just her game, but that's the nature of the mind, right? The mind torments us with, but why? And how do you know? And the process of elimination. So the greatest philosophers of the 20th century are all people who had genius brains, but after they developed brilliant systems of interpretation of the truth, then they returned to that question and thought, but what is the point of this system? What is the point of asking about the system? And all of that turns into Buddhism, where you just question the very existence of the self. So the most sophisticated brains of the 20th century, they have the tendency to turn towards Buddhism. But curiously, Buddhism was rejected in India thousands of years ago because they could see what's the result of Buddhism? It's meaninglessness. You can develop, you know, the really brilliant Buddhist minds, they have Buddhist ethics, and you know, all glories to them, because their point is, well, the Buddha wanted to eliminate suffering, so we want an ethical system that eliminates human suffering. And so, all right, but the Dalai Lama, he eats meat. He doesn't have a problem with that. He doesn't worry that much about the suffering of the animals that he eats, you know, and all respect to the Dalai Lama. I was thinking of a joke, but I can't remember it. Anyway, so the idea of neti, reason turns upon itself like the worm Ouroboros, or the snake that eats its own tail. The symbol for the Greek, we have this symbol for infinity, which goes like that. But the Greeks' symbol that later became the infinity symbol was a snake swallowing its own tail. And that's the nature of reason. It's an endless infinite regression of mirrors. Because if you ask, well, who am I? What is the self? Well, who's asking that question? That must be the self. But they come to this conclusion that the self doesn't exist. There's no importance in asking about the self because it doesn't really exist. The self is it's an epiphenomenon of the brain. Somehow chemicals come together in the brain, create the sense of self, something that has never been proven. The science demands evidence and justification for everything, but there's no proof to that theory that chemicals and electrical impulses in the brain create the self. All they can show is that if you kill the brain, the self is no longer present there. It's undetectable. But killing the brain is not the kind of vidhi that we're talking about. Tad vidhi, it means divine knowledge, knowledge of the self. And that comes through the spiritual master. And we can occupy ourselves with empiric knowledge. If you look in a dictionary, it will say knowledge means empiric knowledge, what you gather through the senses. But that's what dogs do. That's what cats do. They know about sounds, sights, smells. Animals are very good with things like that. Cats can see in the dark. Insects have ultraviolet vision. But we're not relying on the knowledge of this gathered by the senses. As human beings, we have a deeper, powerful sense of reality and who we are. So in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it says, Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Bij Tate Krishna Bhaje Kare Guru Sevan Maya Jale Chute Pai Krishna Charan. Wandering through the universe by the mercy of Krishna, the living entity who is fortunate enough, meets a bona fide spiritual master. And by the mercy of the spiritual master, he gets the seed of the Bhakti Lata, which is the little plant that grows towards Krishna, the Bhakti Lata creeper. And by worshiping Krishna and rendering service to the spiritual master, you become free from this world of Maya and attain the lotus feet of the Lord. So Mukham Karati Vachalam, Pangam Langayate Girim, Yat Kripa Tamahung Vande, Paramananda Madhavam. And somebody asked me about this the other day, because there's another reading of that which puts the Guru's mercy. But we get Lord Madhava through the Guru's mercy. And through his mercy, a blind man can see and a lame man can cross mountains. And it's very difficult to find a bona fide spiritual master, but Tasmad Gurum Prapadyante Jigasu Shreya Uttamam. If you're looking for the truth, you should find a bona fide spiritual master and try to surrender to him. Then you will know the truth. And that's the purport of Tadvidi Pranipatena. So Krishna says, Yajgatva na punar moham evam yasyasi pandava jaina bhutani asheshani drakshasya maniato mai. So now that you've gotten that knowledge from a realized soul, you're not going to fall back into illusion. Once you become enlightened through Krishna consciousness, you're not going to go back to a lower conception thinking, this is the real truth. Apichet asi papebhya sarvebhya papakritama sarvam gyanam plavenaiva vrijinam santarishyasi. He says, even if you're considered to be the most sinful of all sinners, if you're situated in the boat of transcendental knowledge, you will be able to cross over the ocean of miseries. So, of course, sinful activity is defined sometimes by your position in society. So if you're working somewhere and your boss tells you, hey, I saw you mumbling something. You had your hand inside of a bag. What were you doing with your hand in that bag? There's some weird rosary. You're practicing some esoteric religion. Don't you know that's prohibited? We're going to put you in jail for that, or you're going to lose your job, or that's sinful. We don't do that. but you're chanting your japa. Tripurari Maharaj was sitting on the airplane once, and he's chanting his japa. And there's a man next to him who looks at him and he says, why do you have to, what is it about you that you have to do that? He asked him, what is it about you? What's wrong with you that you have to do that? And Tripurari Maharaj turned to him and said, what's wrong with you that makes me do this? So, you're chanting your japa in a park and people are walking their dogs and they think that walking the dog is a beautiful act of sacrifice. And the dog is, making excrement here and there and urinating in the bushes. And they look at you and they see, what is this man with a hand in the bag? That's some weird occult science. I'm going to call the police. So what may be considered sinful by the ordinary society is different. You may be considered the most sinful of all sinners, but if you're in the boat of transcendental knowledge, you can cross the ocean of miseries. And then Krishna says, as a fire turns wood to ash, so the fire of knowledge burns to ashes all reactions to material activities. That's a very powerful idea. So it means even if you're doing some things that might be karmic, but knowing what you know will gradually burn that karma to ashes. Prabhupada points out that in the Upanishads, it says, Ubhe uhai vaisha ete tarati amrita sadvasad huni. One overcomes both the pious and impious reactions of work. Somebody was talking about the Pandavas in hell. Why did okay, here's the end of the book. You suppose at the end of the Mahabharata, they're going to give you the moral of the story. Actually, not true. The real moral of the story is found in the center of the book. The core of the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita. And here you get the real teachings and the real meaning. But after all, every book has to have an ending. And here we see the Pandavas in hell. Why are they in hell? That's terrible. You mean after all that surrender, that's where they go? But this is for the external people, because heaven and hell are really external concepts. They're like different countries that you can visit, right? We have an expression in Mexico. We say, how's everything going? And you say, well, estoy entre Guatemala y Guatepeor. So Guatemala is one country and Guatepeor is another country. Mala means bad and peor means worse. So you're saying I'm between bad and worse, but you're using Guatemala as an example. All respect to the people of Guatemala. Estoy entre Guatemala y Guatepeor. So heaven and hell, it's, entre Guatemala y Guatepeor. Heaven is nice. It's okay. Elvis Presley lived in heaven, didn't he? He had all the girls he wanted, all the drugs, the best everything, best swimming pool, best car, best leather jacket. But heaven and hell, they're sort of relative things. Your heaven is my hell is your heaven. So, okay, we put the Pandavas in hell at the end of the book, so you understand, well, don't lie, don't do bad things like Arjuna. He attacked an innocent man while he was changing his wheel on his chariot. That's a bad thing. He went to hell for that, so don't be a bad boy. But these are very external instructions. We know that the Pandavas are eternal Nitya Parishad of Krishna, and that somewhere, Krishna and Arjuna are enjoying their pastimes, Narayanam namaskrityam naram chaiva narotam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam udirayat. Nara and Narayan are identified with Krishna and Arjuna. So the Mahabharata, as much as we love Karna, he's a great hero. It's a story of Krishna and Arjuna, and their internal friendship, if you like, is played out in the conversation known as the Bhagavad Gita. Some people say, well, how are Krishna and Arjuna friends? What do they do together? You know, do they go out and have fun? Well, they burned the cot of a forest together. But apart from that, how are they play like the cowherd boys? Well, the intimacy of their relationship is shown in the conversation, which is the Bhagavad Gita, which is the greatest conversation. It's the greatest conversation ever published. So then he's recommending, try to move beyond sacrifice. Do sacrifice in knowledge. Do your karma. Okay, fine. But do that as a sacrifice, better. And do that in divine knowledge. Know you are an eternal spirit soul. God is an eternal supreme spirit soul. There's a relationship there. It should be one of service. That will be revealed to you by the guru. So he says, Nahi gyanina sadrisham pavitram ikavidyate tat swayam yoga samshidha kalinat mani vindati. In this world, there's nothing so sublime and pure as transcendental knowledge. Such knowledge is the mature fruit of all mysticism. And one who has become accomplished in the practice of devotional service enjoys this knowledge within himself in due course of time. Of course, Jnana-shunya bhakti is a higher position, as later will be explained by Madhusudana Maharaj when he takes up our Gita talk. But these are the preliminary chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Shradhaval labhate jnanam tatpara sangyatendriya jnanam labdva param shantim achiran adhikachati. Now, this is interesting because just as we're starting to talk about leaving Gyan behind, Krishna mentions Shraddha, which is faith. And somebody put it to me, well, isn't it better to be quietly milking the cows in Vrindavan without reading all these books? And sure, it is, if you can do that. But I told my friend, it's very difficult for me because I like to read books. Books transport me to another universe. I was telling my wife this morning, it's very difficult to make an adaptation of Alice in Wonderland for film because the entire question there is all about thought experiments and thought puzzles. Look at yourself in a mirror. Who's on the other side? Is that really you? Well, that's a silly question for the people sitting here. But if you're a little girl of the age of Alice, you might think, yeah, who is that? Look inside the mirror. Who's on the other side? Is that another girl looking back at me? How do I know? Or imagine yourself as a chess piece moving on the board. If you move 8 squares forward, you become the queen. Everything is yours. But there's obstacles on the way, Tweedledee and Tweedledum. So all these mental puzzles, they're kind of cool if you're 8 or 9 years old and you're learning how to read. But if you put them into a film, they don't make any sense because it's not stimulating your imagination. It's said that a novel or fiction is the lie that tells the truth, but a film is all lies. It's just lies from beginning to end. So it doesn't really stimulate your imagination. But I'm someone who began reading at a very early age, and now my service is books and producing books and literature. I can't just leave all that behind. It would torture my brain. But some people are capable of being great scholars and then living the simplest life possible, like Gorkishore Das Babaji Maharaj, who was externally a very simple person, but is the guru of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, arguably the greatest Vaishnava intellectual ever, after Jiva Goswami. So it's very difficult to dismiss knowledge entirely. And Krishna here is saying you can use knowledge to help you maybe step up a little bit into the divine world. But at that point, Shraddhavan, become faithful. And it's interesting that this verse practically follows the verse about the guru. So the guru will help you develop your faith. And then as you become dedicated to transcendental science and subdue your senses, you'll attain the supreme spiritual peace. Agyas cha shradadanas cha sangshayatma vinashati nayam lokosti na paro na sukham sangshayatmana. He says, but on the other hand, people who get too involved in reason will doubt this knowledge. They'll doubt the scriptures. They'll doubt everything. And so they're ignorant and faithless. And they fall down. Because for the doubting soul, there's happiness neither in this world nor in the next. So, one who acts in devotional service, renouncing the fruits of action, whose doubts have been destroyed by transcendental knowledge, is situated in the self, and so not bound by karma. Then Krishna says, Tasmada jnana sangbhutam hitstam jnana sinatmanaha chitvainam sangshayam yogam atishtotichta bharata. He says, so therefore the doubts which have arisen in your heart out of ignorance should be slashed by the weapon of knowledge, and armed with yoga, O Bharat, stand and fight. And so Krishna gives the conclusion. Now you understand. You have to sacrifice yourself. That's what's being demanded of you. Do it with transcendental knowledge and faith, and dedicate yourself. And that will see you out of the forest of darkness. That will see you to the divine world. So, go, Arjuna. You can do it. Do it, Arjuna. Struggle. It's difficult. It's not easy. It is a struggle. So many obstacles will be in your way, but try to push beyond those obstacles. Have faith. Knowledge might help your faith. Here's some knowledge for you. Go to the guru. Many people ask, well, what's karma? What's not karma? What do I do? What am I not supposed to do? Ask your guru. But don't just go to him and pepper him with questions. Why, teacher, why? Why, teacher, why? You're supposed to offer some service. Be submissive. Don't try to steal from the guru. There's the story of Ekalavya, who Danaishad. He approached Dronacharya and he said, I want to learn from you. And Drona said, I can't accept you as my disciple, I'm sorry. So he made a murti of the guru in the forest, and he learned the science of archery from him. The first time I heard that story, I thought, this is kind of like service and separation, isn't it? He doesn't get the personal association of the guru, but he learns from the murti. And I like that because Prabhupada was in India and I was in Los Angeles. But later, you find that Dronacharya is not happy with Ekalavya. He says, you're stealing from me. This is copyrighted information. You can't use my copyright. This is licensed. I have the publishing rights. You owe me. And Ekalavya says, well, okay, what do you mean? Guru Dakshin. You can't just take my knowledge without some reciprocation. And Ekalavya says, oh, okay, well, what do you want? And Dronacharya says, well, nothing really, just a thumb from your right hand. But if I cut off the thumb of my right hand, how can I fire a weapon. Exactly. Oh. So with the arrowhead, he cut off his thumb and offered that to Drona. And we're to understand from that, don't steal from the guru. Don't go to him. Srila Sridhar Maharaj, sometimes he would say, these people would visit him and ask him all these questions and then disappear forever and never offer anything in return. And sometimes he would say, you're coming to me and you want to get something and put it in your pocket and go away with that so you can show it to other people. And he wasn't very satisfied. He didn't like that. That you'll go to Guru Maharaj and understand everything about rasa and bhav, and then distribute that to your followers. And they'll think, ooh, this person is heavy. He's really deep. And he'll never really say, I learned this from Sridhar Maharaj. That's not the way. So Dronacharya is not happy with Ekalavya. But there's an epilogue to that story that's kind of interesting. And that is that Ekalavya developed a technique of firing a bow with only 4 fingers. He had a special grip for releasing the arrow without the thumb that was later adopted by his tribes and used at the Battle of Kurukshetra. Of course, he fought on the side of Dronacharya against Arjuna, didn't he? I don't remember. Or did he fight with Arjuna? Somebody will tell me. Anyways, my goal is to try to cover an hour of a chapter of Bhagavad Gita in 1 hour. And it took 2 hours to go through the 4th chapter. So every verse of the Bhagavad Gita is so soaked with meaning that you'll find the entire Bhagavad Gita within 1 verse. It's very difficult to just run through it quickly. So, any questions? Let's take some questions. I hope I won't make a fool of myself in the question.
Pranashish Prabhu wrote in the chat, Jesus made the ultimate sacrificing himself for the sinners. We say the ultimate sacrifice is to surrender to Sri Guru and Sri Chaitanya. Actually, it is not a question, I think.
Okay, nice observation. That's right.
Yes. And I have a question. And actually, if anybody has any questions, you can write them in the chat or turn on the sound and ask the questions. And so now
Anyway,
my question
continue
is...
I just want to thank everybody for their patience. Thank you very much for your patience and your kindness. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Brajasundar.
Oh, thank you very much, Mahayogi Prabhu. So my question is about the nature of sacrifice, because there are lots of different cultures and differences in meanings about this word. For example, once we had a difficult situation in Israel when we had something like Vedelach Israel, and there were people who were not speaking Russian, who were Australians, and some person was translating to them from English and from Russian, and there was a big misunderstanding, because for Israelis, the word sacrifice is connotated, its meaning is only with the animal who's been sacrificed in front of the temple. That's why when they were hearing that that people need to sacrifice themselves, they were not understanding what is this at all.
Okay.
So in different cultures,
that's
so
a good question.
Yes, the question is about the sacrifice. I also want to add to the question that in Russia, for example, when we are saying sacrifice, the meaning is that we are doing something for somebody without waiting something that will be given to us, just
Exactly.
doing it without anything. But
Right.
but for example, Ravana, when he was cutting off his heads and offering these heads to Shiva, yes, he was it a sacrifice, or it was like a kind of a contract, because he was doing it because he wanted to get something? And in
Exactly.
Bhagavad Gita, in this chapter, Krishna is telling to Arjuna that people need to sacrifice because they need rains. Yes. So then it is
Right.
also like a contract. But from the other side, Krishna is telling to Arjuna that when he's doing something, he is to do it for the Lord, and he is not to wait for the fruits. So
Okay.
I'm a little bit confused.
Right. So, okay, in the first place, a lot of what we're looking at has to do with defining terms. Okay. So what do we mean when we say karma? What is dharma? What is gyan? What is sacrifice? Jagya. So that's really where the battle over interpretation comes in, because what karma means to us now and what it meant to Arjuna may be different. But we're talking about the word jagya, okay? The word jagya means Vishnu, but it means sacrifice in terms of giving something. Now, there's different levels, aren't there, of giving. There's cultures in Oceania, New Guinea, where they realize a kind of festival called a potlatch. And in this festival, 2 or 3 or 4 tribal chiefs come together to give presents. And whoever gives the best presents wins the potlatch, and the other kings become his slave. So we get together for like a Christmas festival, and I give you a car, but you gave me some Christmas candles. So I win and you lose. It's called a potlatch. So that kind of giving, it's classified later by Krishna as giving in the mode of ignorance, the mode of passion, and the mode of goodness, right? So if I give something and I want something back, that's the mode of passion or ignorance, right? If I sacrifice an animal because I want good rain, and I kill the animal and sprinkle his blood on the altar and then burn him and we eat the animal, that's sacrifice in the mode of ignorance, just to be clear. All right. Now, if you're thinking about God while you're doing it, depending on the God that you worship, the God who likes that sort of thing might be, I don't know, I never practiced that kind of sacrifice. Maybe Shiva. I don't know. I don't want to insult Shiva, but he's capable of that. Mm-hmm. So that's sacrifice in the mode of ignorance. The idea of sacrifice in English, anyway, is to make something sacred. The idea of jagya is to give it to Vishnu. But as long as you're offering something to God or a higher power, but you want something back, that's in the mode of passion. Maybe I offer something good. I offer flowers. Let's change the scenario. It's not animals. I'm offering flowers to God on his birthday because I want peace in the world. Well, that tilts more towards the mode of goodness, doesn't it? Right? I'm doing something to make people happy. I want God to make people happy. So I offer beautiful flowers on the altar. But the verb is I want, and that's in the mode of passion. That's not really in the mode of goodness, is it? I want this. Why? Because I'm the center. Me, my ego. So what am I trying to make sacred? My desire. I'm trying to sanctify my ego. Is that the highest kind of sacrifice? No, it isn't, right? To offer yourself, that's better. A mother will offer herself for the good of her children. But even there, there's some selfish motive. I want my children to be happy. It's still I want, right? So to sacrifice your ego, that's really difficult. And to sacrifice your ego for Krishna, that's called Krishna consciousness. So what's being expressed between the third and fourth chapter here in the Gita are different ideas of sacrifice. And when Krishna says, well, you can't even eat without sacrifice, what he's pointing out is that human survival depends on an understanding of a higher power. If human society is to exist and thrive, you have to sacrifice something, even to eat. But he's not telling Arjuna that's the best thing. He's offering a gradation. He says, well, first there's, you just do your karma because you have to. Then you do your karma because it's sanctioned by the gods. Above that, you're thinking, okay, I want a connection with God, but it's still on the level of I want. Give up the I want. Develop some knowledge. Understand who the real ego is, and you can give up the ego. You can sacrifice the ego in the fire of divine knowledge. That's what I think he's saying. Not so easy. That's not so easy. How do you sacrifice your ego in the fire of divine knowledge? We have mundane chores to attend to. We have to take out the trash. You have to pay the water bill, right? But okay, your karma for paying the water bill should involve some kind of sacrifice. But then on a higher level, right, to make things sacred, to give of yourself, you're giving your attention to the holy name of Krishna, because the sacrifice for this age is kirtan, sankirtan, harinama, harinama, harinama eva kevalam, kalo nasteva, 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 gatiranyata. There's no other way. This is Kali Yuga. So, okay, you have to work to pay the water bill, but sacrifice your ego to the holy name of Krishna as much as you can. There you go. There's a nice sacrifice that you can do. And when you pray to Krishna, what do people ask me? What do you pray for? Right? Do you ask him for your health? Do you say, oh, Krishna, please, I have a heart condition. Please help me, Krishna. No, I don't. I don't want to bother Krishna with my trivial problems. I want to try to invoke the holy name, to try to remember, okay, there's Radha, there's Krishna, there's Radha, oh Hare. Maybe Krishna is saying, oh Hare, oh Radha, and maybe Radha is saying, oh Krishna. And that's it. More than that, I'm trying to invoke the holy name so that the holy name appears in my heart. And why? But why, teacher, why? Because this is what was given to me by my guru as the highest kind of divine realization. Welcome Radha and Krishna into your heart. So sometimes somebody told me the other day, Govinda Maharaj was about to crash in a car, and there were some other sannyasis with him. And a car is coming up on them, and the other sannyasis are going, "Oh Krishna, oh Ram, oh Krishna, oh Ram." And Govinda Maharaj says, "Why trouble Krishna with this? Jai Ma Kali," because who controls the car crash and who gets hurt? That's a question for the material nature. Why bother Krishna with that? So, okay, I will bother Ma Kali. I'll talk to Shiva about that one. Help me out on this, Shiva, please. I'll pay you back. I'll make a sacrifice at your altar. But my real attention is on the higher domain. My real attention is with Sri Govinda, with Hare Krishna. That's where I want to go. That's what I want to be, So Srila Sridhar Maharaj always used to point out there's gradation everywhere. If you look at the Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd and 4th chapter, he's discussing what the Russians call giving without accepting something in return, But we're not talking about killing an animal and sprinkling his blood. That might be the meaning of sacrifice in another culture. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
And thank you all for having the patience to spend an hour hour and a half with me doing this. I know you all have very high and divine realizations, and you've all been practicing Krishna consciousness for many years. And so I want to thank Marina Volashina and Ikarashi for tuning in, Ananta Shesh, ahí en España, and Lilavati and Elena, I can't read, Bitolina, Namapriya, Nadia Priya Kharkiv, and Suvashini. Suvashini is with us. Hi, Hare Krishna. And Tapanandini, of course, from beautiful Merida, Yucatan, the White City, and R.M. Das of Lvov or Lviv. Is it Lviv or Lvov? I don't know. It looks like Lviv, but I think it's Lvov. I don't know. Hare Krishna. Thank you for joining us and spending a few moments with us. And of course, Praneshri, I didn't mention you because I see big Tulsi bush. So Tulsi Maharani ki jai, Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Thanks to everybody.
Mahayogi Prabhu, thank you very much for this very, very interesting talk. Next week, we will meet and you will tell us about the 5th chapter, yes?
Yep. And the fifth chapter is kind of short, so we'll probably be able to finish it in one go.
Okay. So Jai Mahayogi Prabhu ki Jai.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Thank you for joining us. Adios.
Adios.
Bye-bye.
Please accept our dandavats.
До свидания.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Dandavad.